This training video will demonstrate the proper procedure for performing the loss by wash analysis, per the Michigan test method. First, obtain your previously split and dried aggregate sample. Refer to Section 5 for the appropriate methods for drying the material. MTM state that a conventional oven, microwave oven, a gas or electric stove, or a hot plate are available for this purpose. We must next verify that the sample is in fact completely dry. MTMs allow for the use of the paper curl method to determine this. It should be noted this method is not reliable for some aggregates, including those with large stone, such as coarse and open-grade limestone, slags, and crushed concrete. Use a thin strip of paper and place it in the heated sample. Observe. If the sample is dry, the paper will lay flat in the sample. But if moisture is present, the paper will curl, indicating that additional drying is needed. Make sure you have the proper equipment for this test, including a number 200 sieve, a number 16 sieve, and a balance, or scale, appropriate for the sample size you need to test. Place the cool sample on the balance. The sample should be easy to handle without the use of gloves. Allow a balance to stabilize and record the value to the nearest gram. Note that the balance readout displays the weight of both the sample and the container or pan used. You can elect to weigh the empty pan prior or after the test, but it must be accounted for at some point. The dry weight, or initial weight, is probably the most critical value to record when performing this test. All other results are calculated using this weight. Make sure this value is recorded prior to moving forward, or you'll be scrapping the sample and starting the test over from the very beginning. This value can be easily determined by simply subtracting the pan from the value displayed on the scale, leaving only the value for the weight of material in the pan. It is good practice to label your pan with a unique identifier. Next, make sure your lab station and all your equipment is clean and free of any material left over from another test. When ready, make sure you wet down both sieves or screens being used. This will help ensure that all the fine particles are allowed to pass through the sieve openings easily. It also helps ensure that the test is being performed in the same way across all labs. Standardizing your results across consultant, producer, and municipal labs is critical. The number 200 sieve should be placed on the bottom of the stack, with the number 16 sieve protecting the fragile mesh of the 200 sieve from any falling stones. The number 200 sieve is very fine and easily damaged. Our next step is to add potable water to this sample. Again, make 100% sure that the mass of the dry material is recorded before this step. It's very common for new technicians to forget, and there's no going back once the water is added. Allow the water to saturate the sample. It is our goal to allow every particle of dust, or P200 material, to pass through the sieves. Stirring and agitating the sample will aid in this process. The purpose of this test is to determine what percentage of material is smaller than the 200 sieve. Everything that goes down the drain is smaller than that bottom sieve and is lost to the drain. That is why this test is called the loss by wash procedure. Periodically wash the outside of the sample pan into the sieves as well. This helps ensure that no errant particles from inside the pan dirty the outer walls of the container or bowl. Be especially careful to not allow any water to be drained outside the sieves. To ensure this, make sure to keep the lower edge of whatever bowl or container you use over the sieve openings as well. It is very common for the surface tension of the water to cause the stream to cling to the edge of the pan when pouring. Make sure nothing drips outside the sieve. A drop here or there may seem inconsequential, but it all adds up. Use care, accuracy, and precision to ensure accurate results. When the water becomes very clear, so that no stone particles appear clouded after 10 seconds, the sample is considered washed. Use due diligence to make sure that no pockets of clay are present in the bottom corners of the container. This is another common mistake made by new technicians. Use the tool to stir up all 4 bottom corners when performing this test. Try to decant as much excess water as you can. This will assist in speeding up the drying process. Lightly shaking or tapping the container will cause trapped water to rise to the top of the sample. Next, use your tool or water to gather all the material contained on the screens back into your sample pan. We want to ensure that all material retained on the number 16 and number 200 screens is reincorporated back into the sample pan. Since the loss by wash test measures how much material is lost past the number 200 screen, we don't want to inflate that value by leaving any retained material behind on the screens. After the number 16 screen is cleaned, gather all the fines retained on the number 200 screen into one area of the screen by spraying water to move the particles. Do not use any tools on the 200 sieve, as doing so will damage or stretch out the fragile wires of the screen. Make sure you don't allow any particles to spill. Observe the water that passes through the 200 screen. It should be a clear stream of water. If it is brown or gray tinted, that means there is still material passing the 200 screen, and the retained material should be rinsed further. Once the stream of water appears to be clear, transfer all the retained material into the pan. If any material remains on the screen, the loss by wash values will not be accurate. If there is excess water in the pan, it will take much longer to dry the sample. To counter this, you may decant some excess water into the screens. Take care to avoid dumping any significant amount of aggregate during this final decant procedure. Shaking or tapping the sides of the pan will cause additional water to rise to the surface. Wash the small amount of dust back into the sample pan. A spray bottle will help ensure that only a minimal amount of water is used. As a final step in the washing process, inspect the sieves for any leftover material. There should be no fines or grit present anywhere in the sieves. Next, dry the sample in an approved heating device, for example, an oven, or direct heat with a skillet device. If the material is transferred to a new device, make sure that the pan is thoroughly washed and cleaned. Dry the wet pan in an oven or on a burner. Plug in the skillet, if used, and stir occasionally to ensure the entire sample gets dried. Make sure that excess heat does not cause the sample to boil excessively. This may cause the particles to be sprayed outside the skillet, invalidating the test. A gas or electric range is also allowed to dry the sample pan. The heat should not cause the water to excessively boil and spray the material out of the pan. The sample should be monitored to ensure that no excess particles are sprayed outside the container. If after drying loose particles are observed, these should be incorporated back into the sample. The material should be fully dried. If the paper curl method is not appropriate to verify the condition of the material, the constant weight method must be utilized. This involves weighing the container and sample, waiting a period of 10 minutes, and confirming that the sample is no longer losing weight. If an oven is used to obtain constant weight, 20 to 30 minutes should elapse between these measurements. If the two weights are within 0.10% of each other, the material is considered to have reached constant weight. If a skillet was utilized to dry the material, transfer all material back into the sample pan. Use a brush to ensure that the entire sample is transferred. Once the sample has cooled enough to be handled, place the sample on a scale to take your final measurements. The difference between the initial weight and the washed weight is our loss by wash in grams. This value can then be divided by the initial weight and multiplied by 100 to convert to our final percentage result. Record this value on the appropriate MDOT form. Make sure that the precision of your test results match the precision required by the specifications. If the maximum allowable loss by wash in the specifications is 1.0%, make sure your result also goes to the 10th decimal place. If the precision of the specifications goes to the whole number, make sure your value is also recorded and reported as a whole number.